Hello and welcome to today's webinar. This is in the Aegis 360 Business Acumen series. This is part 2 of a 4-part webinar series. Just so you know, the upcoming webinars will be on October 22nd on Innovation Acumen, and then on December 10th on Hiring and Recruiting Acumen. Today's session is on Training Acumen, and it is hosted by Ned Parks with his guest, Libby McComber. Ned, you want to go ahead?
Thank you, Ann. Appreciate it. Welcome, everyone. We're glad you're here. I'm Ned Parks, founder of Aegis 360 Consulting. We're celebrating 20 years in business this year. It's kind of an odd year to be celebrating 20 years, but this is where we are, so we're making the most of it and having a great time. And I've got my dear friend and guest on, Libby McComber from Selemi. She's the Associate Managing Director at the Americas Selemi. Libby, welcome.
Thank you, Ned. Glad to be here.
Glad that you're here. And tell us just a little bit about Selemi as a company and what you, I know what you do, but tell our guests what you guys are up to.
Absolutely. Well, at Selemi, we're a global learning and development company, and we're especially known for our business simulations. And we have offices in Malmö, Sweden, which is where our headquarters is located. We have office in Chicago, which I'm out of, although I work remotely from Indianapolis. And we also have an office in Shanghai, China. We do a lot of off-the-shelf business simulations and solutions. And we can alter those if necessary for clients and tweak them so that they're perfectly custom to fit their needs. We also have a really nice group of engineers in our Malmö, Sweden office that create custom from the very beginning, from blank slate to the end. And Ned, you've been a partner of ours for quite a while. We value you so much, and usually when we're working with clients, you take the lead. You work your clients through everything that we do and make sure that your deep knowledge of their business shines in each solution.
Well, thanks, Libby. And I can tell you from now several years, quite a few years, actually I think 6 now total, I've been a partner with Selemi, and it has been one of those relationships in business that I wish I had done it 6 years before I did it. It has really been fantastic, and I've been to Malmö twice for partner meetings, and I've gotten to see, at least on the periphery, some of the skunk works and the magic take place in building these simulations, and they really are quite fantastic. And now you guys are building them in digital format, so it's a whole new world for all of us, and this is great. So I want to talk a little bit about this whole thing of business acumen. We've been talking about it in our Selemi network and in other networks, and people hear the term, and as Libby, as you and I have discussed, and we've discussed it with others, when we say business acumen to people, their brains immediately shift to finance, and mistakenly they believe, although there's a piece of it that's very accurate, they mistakenly believe that finance is the only thing that surrounds business acumen. But we know that's not quite true, don't we?
Absolutely. Finance is the language of business, and we always need to use that as our scorecard, right? But good business decisions involve so much more.
They really do. And so we've really worked to try to develop the right definition, if you will, and we've got it on the slide in front of you. I don't need to read it, but what I always like to tell people is it's all these different pieces, parts. It's the marketing piece, it's the strategy piece, it's the finance piece, it's the training piece, the leadership development, the process piece. How are we processing the work that we do? Is the process efficient, or is it effective? Is it compelling? Is it all of those things? And we need to look at each and every piece and part of the business. So one of the things that we've done is we've said, okay, what makes up this whole thing of business acumen? And you can see these 8 different components here. The one we're focused on today is the leadership and employee development, and training very specifically is what we're going to talk about with that. But as you can see, all of these things fit together in one place. And if you leave one of those out, then oftentimes we find people lack in business acumen. Libby, you and I were talking about this a couple months ago, and I can't remember now where it was. I should have captured it, but there was a survey or report or something was done about one of the components that we're looking at in people that are able to get promoted and or run their businesses, but in a larger organization get promoted, is how do we measure their business acumen? And I don't know that we know how to measure the business acumen knowledge yet, but it is a absolutely critical component, isn't it?
It absolutely is, because if I'm a leader, I need to have all the knowledge of each piece. Or, Ned, we can't be great at everything, right? So we have to have people that surround us that we can rely on, that are great at each piece of this business acumen puzzle.
Yeah, and I've even had clients where they're really strong in one area and they drive the entire organization through that area and they lack in so many others. And in spite of themselves, they make money. And I said to a client one time, he was kind of in a little debate with me because I was giving him some feedback on his business. And he says, yeah, but look at all the money I'm making. I said, I'm impressed with all the money you're making, but what I'm terrified is all the money you're leaving behind because you're missing these other things. And the conversation went to a dead stop. The poor guy didn't know what to say. And, it's been probably 15 or 20 years, and I ran into him at a completely different kind of a social event. He and I were talking, and it was outside. It was summer, and this was before COVID. And he said, you know what? He said, I've never forgotten that statement. And he goes, it hit me so hard. And he said, I've now since tried to, over the last 15 years, tried to round out the rest of my knowledge or get people to help me with it and understand that spending money in some of these other areas is really important. So it was kind of a wake-up call.
I love it.
So why do we train? I mean, why would we spend our time training our employees? And there's a very old a thing out there, and nobody knows who really said it first, but they always say, what if I train my employees and they leave? And then the response is, what if you don't train them and they stay? And I worked for a president of a company, one of the best leaders I've ever had, and he always used to tell me, he said, train your employees to do two things: take your job, and he said, and be prepared to take your job, even for the short term if you're not there, and or when they leave you, they're a good mouthpiece for you and your business. I never, ever forgot that. I can remember I was staring at a salad when he said it. That's how impactful it was for me. And it was like, wow, that was really an interesting thing. But I found this report, Workforce Learning Report, that LinkedIn put out. I was really interested in it. So there's two pieces. It's quite a lengthy report, but there's two things that came out. So, Libby, I'm going to put you on the spot here a little bit. What % of employees will stay longer? Stay longer. So this is a recruitment piece. This is an employee recruitment piece. Forget the fact that they know more. Will stay longer if the company invests in their careers. What do you think?
These new employees that are coming into the market that are so talented, they won't let us get away with not training them. So yes. I'd have to say that that's a pretty high percentage. And I'm going with 82.
Well, you're not far off, and you're certainly in the right ballpark. But it's even more stunning than that, right? So, and this, I've been in this line of work almost my entire professional career in one way or another. I've either supported it, or I've done it for my employees, or in the role I play now, I do it as a main part of our business. But what the thing that always fascinated me when I read this, it was kind of a watershed moment, because I looked at that and I said, I've always talked about the fact that we should invest in training almost as an added bonus, like the gravy on the mashed potatoes of the recruitment piece and the retention piece. But what they're saying here is it may be more than just an added bonus. It may be a requirement for retention, and it, or at least on equal footing with the skill building piece of it. Don't you think?
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, when I'm working with companies, I'll often go online and look at their mission, vision, and values. And if they have developing their employees or some nod to employee development on their website, I know that it's not going to be kind of that uphill battle with the company, that we're on the same page. And the best thing we can do is work together to make sure that they have the best employees in the industry.
Exactly, and if you're old like I am, you better get really good at things like Glassdoor and Indeed and some of these other places where current and former employees can go talk about your company, because that never happened before. You had to know somebody, and you had to know somebody and know somebody and know somebody, and then you'd call them on the phone and you'd meet them for coffee to get this. Now with the click of a button, you'll get it. And it's fascinating to me when you start to read some of these things, and you'll see that people say invest in their employees or don't invest in their employees. And I can tell you, my 27-year-old is looking for her big kid job, and she has educated me in many ways. She'll say, "Oh, I'm not even going to apply to that company. I don't care what the job looks like," or, "Oh, I really would like to work there." And much of it is built around the public persona, if you will, of the company and how they interact with their employees and what they do. She just talked about a company the other day, and she said, "Dad, I think I really want to take a hard look at this company." And I said, "Well, what interested you?" And she said, this was fascinating to me. She said, "Well, they give you 2 days a year to go out and volunteer on different charitable events." And I like that. If they believe in that, then they must believe in other things that are good. And I was like, whoa, that's just stunning. And then there was the development piece, just of the skill development piece.
Yeah, what's the culture like? Thinking about that is so important when you're looking for work and staying at a job.
Absolutely. So then the other thing that this report talked about was what's the most important to talent developers, so the people in the L&D and the HR department and that group, the people managers, so your production managers, plant managers, whomever, and the executives. So they were allowed to pick between leadership, communication, collaboration, role-specific skills. And I can tell you that many people would default to a couple of these things, and they'd probably be wrong. So let's just see what was most important that they get trained on, which I thought was really interesting. Leadership, communication, and calibration, or collaboration. So Libby, you and I have had this conversation 1,000 times.
Yes.
Let's talk about these for a little bit, and specifically where they need to fall in the training. So do we need to do leadership training, or does leadership, communication, collaboration need to be a part of all training?
Well, and I believe in the latter, right? That's why I came to Selemi.
Yeah.
And it is interwoven. It should be interwoven into all training. There should be components of developing your leadership, of communicating well and collaborating with the people either online, right, virtually, or within that room that you're working in. Doesn't matter where the training takes place, but there must be a portion of leadership, communication, and collaboration. And I know you believe in that. I believe in it wholeheartedly.
Well, and that's the thing that is interesting. I came to Selemi as a partner back about 2012. I had a client who'd had a lot of history with the company, and because Selemi's been around for almost 35 years now, and they had a lot of interaction with the products and the people, and they kept pushing me. They said, "Ned, we really think we would absolutely hire you to do this," and blah, 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 blah. And I kept getting, okay. So what was interesting is I wound up meeting personally with a bunch of folks from the Chicago office, which is the Americas office. And this struck me. So your colleague up there, who I've known for a while, Jay, made the following comment to me. And I found out it's not just a comment Selemi says. It's something that is deeply believed in the design build of each simulation. And he said, whether we're doing a finance simulation with some hardcore finance, I mean profit and loss and balance sheets and net present values and all these heavy-duty finance things that we train sometimes, he said, no matter what it is, the one thing that we build into everything we do is this unspoken, sometimes not even listed objective of consensus building, conflict resolution, leadership, negotiation skills. Because of the way the simulations are built, these three things are happening organically. Can you give us a quick example of what that might look like with one of the simulations?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, a hot topic right now for us is agility, right? How do we work with agility as our world is turning on its head? And how do we continue to be productive? So we have a simulation called Agile Move. It's fully digital. People get in teams of approximately 3 or 4, and they work through challenges that we give them that are very typical in everyday workplace situations. And we have them try to decide A, B, or C, what is the best path forward when facing these challenges. And the team has to decide. It's not one person saying, oh, I think it's A, another person thinking, oh, it's C for sure. No, they have to collaborate. They have to debate and communicate why they think that the team should go with B, right? And then when you get back into the room, into the main room, Ned, you'll reveal, what the best answer was,
Right.
and you'll have scores of all of the teams. And then you'll talk about, why do you think that was important? In our simulations, there's never an easy, perfect answer. It's just like in the real world,
Right.
where you're faced with a challenge and you're given all kinds of alternatives that have bad things that may happen,
Right.
rewards,
Yeah.
but consequences as well. And that type of rigorous discussion helps you become a good decision maker, become a good debater as you move forward in your career.
It's interesting. I was showing somebody how to facilitate one of the simulations, and this was a couple of years ago, and they said, so how long do you give them to work on this? And I said, I kind of have a time frame in mind because we've still got to end at 4:30 in the afternoon, but what I'm really listening for is a nuance. I know that somewhere between 10 and 15 minutes is going to work for this because that's where they normally stop. But I said I'll call an end to it when all of the conversations at the different tables have gone off of what the assignment was. But so I was saying I want you to just kind of listen in as you walk by, and if they're still debating or if they're still struggling, then there's much more learning taking place there. Let it go. And that's where the facilitator needs to just relax and not be so much in control and say, the simulation itself is so strong and the training itself is so strong that it almost takes care of itself.
Yeah, trust the process. And people understand their own businesses, believe it or not, better than we do sometimes, right? So we have the great theories, hypothesis, and we have great experience.
Right.
But really, the main learning just comes from that rigorous conversation about their specific business. Now,
Right.
they do it in fiction, but then we pull them back into the real world, and they do it for their own company.
Yep.
And the ahas become pretty dramatic.
They do become very dramatic, and it's wonderful when people, you can see the light bulb going off, or they throw their arms in the air because they felt some success, and they say, I've got it.
Yeah, and behavior change comes when I get it myself rather than having somebody tell me. Yeah.
Exactly. So, the other question that we get a lot is, how do I know what training to do? And there's no shortage of, needs analysis and electronic surveys and all sorts of processes out there and so on and so forth. And I want to just say that I think some of this for yourself and myself and those of us that have been in the business a while, frequently a client will say, we need to do this training. And I learned a long time ago to say, and what brought you to that conclusion? And frequently they then tell you a story, and I go, you really don't need to do that. You really need to do this, and that's way over there. And so it's really our job to figure it out. But I would also tell you on just solid skills, sometimes we just look at a skill gap and say, this isn't happening, so we need to do some training there. We've got a lot of business writing, and it's poorly written. There's not good grammar. It's not a complete sentence. So that's pretty easy to identify, and we get a specialist and it helps with business writing. But the other thing I will tell you is I like to do, and I don't care how you do it, whether it's interviews or electronic surveys, although in this particular instance, I like interviews a little better, is just go and ask the employees, what do you need to learn to do your job better? They probably know better than their boss in most cases. And then the other is employee requests. You can certainly do electronic in larger groups, but I have seen a lot of money spent on needs analysis, and I will tell you that oftentimes we don't need to go there. We need to do a fairly straightforward what would help you, and they'll tell us, won't they? I mean, they'll just tell us, and then we can decide what's going to work.
Yeah, and the outside looking in is so important in this instance. I'll give you just a short story of an experience I had. I had somebody come to me and say, we really need to have emotional intelligence training for our R&D organization. And it was an organization that was had just a guru that was working on a molecule because it was pharmaceutical. And, nobody wanted to work with this person because they were very, very difficult to work with. But they were a genius. They were amazing, and they couldn't live without this person. And so they said, we need to change his behavior. And I said, yeah, guess what? We're not going to change his behavior. We're going to change everybody around him. Because we are more flexible, we are molded easier because of our understanding of the situation. And from birth, if someone was, told how awesome they were based on this, we're not going to change that later in life. And maybe we don't even want to because it's part of the genius. But in order to get that machine running well, that outside looking in can say, hey, we can all bend and flex around what's going on here, work on processes, work on other issues that can make this sing. And that's one of the most projects I'm most proud of, working with that. And I know you can look at a situation, Ned, as a consultant and see the big picture rather than being inside the organization and just kind of dealing with all of the difficult situations.
Well, yeah, we're not constrained by the politics of the organization. We're not constrained by the next promotion. We're not constrained by the fact that I have to sit next to you for the next, ever, right? We're only constrained by being completely honest with our clients and say, I really disagree with where you are, and if our clients are good and they listen to us, we can help them make great strides. And I always try to tell clients, look, I'm not going to make the change for you. I'm going to give you some tools. You got to do it on your own. And I like to say we're pretty proud of ourselves, either whether it's a consulting project or a training project, of giving them the tools. We're pretty good at that. And the simulations really help bring that to life from the training acumen side of the house. But again, I would tell you to have somebody ask the right questions is, I always like to say I'd rather have 10 great questions than one great answer, because oftentimes if I don't have enough questions, I'm asking the wrong question, which gives me the wrong answer. So, well, let's talk a little bit about the delivery aspect of training, and certainly these are pretty typical, right? We've got in-person training that we've done. We've certainly are doing live online training, which is right now the rage, and for obvious reasons. But I also will tell you, at least with myself and many of my other colleagues, and I know Libby, some of the colleagues that you and I are connected with, we're trying to take today's live online and make them relevant 5 years from now, and make them available to where when we're able to go back in person in kind of an unrestricted environment, which is going to happen, we still have this live online that we've now perfected, and we've got the technology to back it up. And I will tell you that although it needs to be done a little different, really is quite effective. Some people have heard of computer-based self-paced learning, where you go on and there's a learning management system and you read a paragraph or watch a video and you have a short little quiz to take, and then it gives you a couple ways to get it correct. And I've had people say, is that valuable? And I go, well, it really all depends what you're trying to teach. And that would be true for a lot of these. If I was trying to give you your annual policy training for lockout tagout, that would probably be a great way to go about it. It would probably is very efficient. It's very black and white, and so on and so forth. And there's other things that I would say, forget it. I'm a pilot and I still am actively flying, and the aviation world for years has worked on computer-based self-paced. And I can tell you, depending upon those topics, I think it's done very, very well. And I truly believe in it. Now, we've tried to apply it to a lot of things that doesn't work very well. Traditional workshops, which is the in-person, and then on-the-job training, and then what we're really talking about a little bit today is the simulation. So we're going to kind of get into simulations and what that looks like and why it's there, and so on and so forth. The other type of delivery training that I don't have up here, I think, is an informal, sometimes cup of coffee at the coffee pot, which we're missing right now. Right, that we're not able to, gee, I was with you when you were talking to Bob on the production line over there, and you did a really great job. The next time you might think about blah blah blah. That's that informal kind of training that takes place almost organically, and a lot of times people don't even know they're doing it, and I think that needs to be discussed as well. But these are just, some very simple types of delivery of training. And again, I always say, which one should we do, Ned? Well, what are you trying to teach? What are we trying to train? And then I can give you an answer. So, they're all great if we're doing the right topic and delivered in the right way. So let's talk a little bit about gamification. Huge word now for, probably going on 10 years, I would guess, in the training world. We've been talking about gamification, and people are saying, what is it, and so on and so forth. And so I just went out and grabbed a very simple definition, and then I've highlighted here really what makes something gamification in the training environment. And it's anytime you have any kind of point scoring or competition, or there's a specific rule of play, is generally kind of a high-level gamification piece. Libby, there is some training that is heavily weighted on the gamification side, heavily weighted. And does that still have value, or is it just a game people are playing? Are we actually learning anything when it's truly just a game?
Yeah, I think there's always learning value there. But to me, there needs to be a point to learning. There needs to be an aha. And a lot of times if the competition is too tight, that's what we're focusing on rather than the collaboration, the communication, and all of that. So I think there's a tipping point there, Ned, what do you think?
Well, I absolutely, and it's interesting, and I know with clients that you've talked to with the Selemi processes, people will say, is there a competitive nature to this? And I say, there is. In fact, what's interesting is, and what I love about it is we can put it in or take it out based upon each individual delivery. But I say, even if we take it out, I can tell you people are competitive in nature, and they're going to put it in if we don't. So I like to say we have to be skilled at putting this in so we don't let it run away, as you talked about, that the competition or the gamification piece becomes the overriding factor of just trying to win the game instead of trying to learn something. So we need to manage that, and I see a lot of places don't manage it very well, and I'm always concerned about that. I do believe it needs to be there, but I do believe we need to manage kind of how that looks. We have a simulation, one of our flagship ones with Selemi, Apples and Oranges, which is a basic one-day finance simulation. And we had a client come in, and they were enamored with this, and there's really only in year 3, depending upon what you do, there's a little gamification put into a little competition. And so they came in, and they had 2 great big, huge bags of groceries. And I thought, what are they doing? It was at the end of the day. And they threw out apples and oranges to people all over the room as kind of a gift or a prize for how well they had done. And then one table got some gift cards to a local store, which I thought was kind of fun. And so that certainly can be put in there, but absolutely. The other way I look at this is there an algorithm with some level of scoring that goes into it? And I do believe that there's great value, but we as the builders of these and the facilitators of these have to manage them very tightly so, as you point out, that we don't get a runaway. So what's a simulation and how is that different? And I, obviously, being an old military pilot, I go back to those simulation routes for me. In fact, I still fly FAA-approved flight simulators today, and I do some teaching in them. And I loved this particular piece of the definition of imitating of a situation or process. We're trying to put the learner in as close to real as absolutely possible. Libby, the thing I love about them is that the mistakes that are made in a simulation are not anywhere near as costly as they are in real life. Right?
You can take a few more risks. You're building up muscle memory, and you're wanting to win the competition, but you also know that the consequences are just going to be on paper, right?
We have a kind of what I call the big brother to Apples and Oranges, which is decision-based. It's a 2-day, pretty heavy-duty simulation. There's a lot of strategy, and they get to make their own decisions. And I was running it for a client, and a table of three participants made an error, and the error was they didn't follow one of the procedures, which meant that they weren't allowed to do any business the whole next year at all. It just took them right. They couldn't go to marketplace, and they couldn't get any business at all. And I thought that was going to be the death of them. I thought, I'm going to have my first quote unquote bankruptcy. And you know what? They used that time very wisely. They ended up out making more money than the other 7 tables we had. They really came back quite strong. And it was great because we were able to debrief that of, in the real world, when you make a pretty drastic mistake in the real business world, you can still regroup from that, take a deep breath, and figure out what you're going to do to be even stronger on the other end. And it was great. The other piece that I love about this is, in a flight simulator, we have a pause button. So the student pilot can be, doing something wrong, and unlike the real airplane, I can just reach and hit a button and work with them and get them to understand the difference. And Libby, what I love is, and maybe this was part of it, the first time I saw one of the simulations run, Jay actually said, well, let's hit the pause button. My head about spun off my shoulders, because that's a word that, a phrase and I said, oh my gosh, yes. So it's really cool because when you run the simulations, you start and stop them all the time, don't you?
Absolutely, because you are watching what they're doing and really assessing what decisions they're making, who's the leader in the group, who's stepping up to the plate. You've got all of this information that you're taking in as you're either popping into their room virtually or walking around the room in person. And that wealth of knowledge that you're gathering from each table, you can point out a table that's either doing something really well or doing something not so well, and the whole group can benefit from it. Yeah.
There's obviously we'll maintain confidentiality, but there's a client that Libby and I both know of, and they'll run the Selemi simulations. They actually then have coaches that are watching the participants to assess their leadership chops and how well they do in working in this collaborative environment. That's pretty extreme, but they claim they have great luck with it, and their culture is one where nobody even pays attention. It's like, yeah, whatever, okay, they're here, we don't even care. In other cultures, that would be a pretty hard pill to swallow if they did it out of the clear blue, but it's really fascinating that they really get they get a real return on that investment of time. So the difference really then between these two things is this whole piece of, in the game or the gamification, we have the ability then to put in some scoring, some competitive nature, so on and so forth. And simulation can really be about being able to start and stop, make mistakes, fix the mistakes, so on and so forth, and not have the tuition, quote unquote, the tuition price being so high. We're not losing real money. We're not hurting real people, so on and so forth. So are there some pros and cons to these? Well, there certainly are. So what are some of the pros to both of these? And I like adding the friendly competition, because as we said earlier, they're going to go there whether we create that environment or not, right? How many times have you set it up before you even get the first step out? Somebody raises their hand and say, so how do we beat that table over there, right?
Yes.
Which adds that friendly, fun piece to it, right? So I think that's great. I love that. I do believe that the gamification can keep some engagement. It's like, okay, what's the score? How did we do? Especially high-performing people in many organizations want this immediate feedback. How did we do? Was it right? Was it wrong? So I think it's huge there. And I think it's great for the self-based, computer-based technology and computer-based training that's going on. And we see that with any game. You go on your computer now and pull up any free game, and they give you leaderboards, and that's all gamification. They give you a score, and sometimes the score is higher if you did it in a short amount of time. And so we can learn a lot from that piece of it, and we can put it into the training if we want. So I think it's great for all that. On the simulation side, what are the pros of using that? Well, it allows for what I call safe failure. And as I say, I learn way more from my failures than I do from my successes. When I do something wrong, it's like, wow, I learned a lot with that. Now I don't like it. I don't go around and try to fail on purpose, but this is a safe place for us to just completely bomb and recover. It does simulate the real world, and that, I think, is one of the the difficult parts about building out one of these simulations, and where the Brain Trust from Malmo does such a great job, because they research the real world and then they build it into it. And then and this is a huge one for me, it encourages peer learning and discovery learning. So Libby, I know you've seen it. Apples and oranges is a great example. We'll put, and I tell clients, well, we're going to have a person from finance at the table, so in the room, so who should they sit with? And I said, well, it doesn't really matter. And it doesn't matter because while we may not be teaching them anything new from what's a profit and loss on a balance sheet, they know that like they know the back of their own hand. So they're not going to learn that, but what they are going to learn is how much their colleagues who aren't working in finance might know about this that they think they don't. What they might learn is how to teach another person and how to help pull that out. They also might discover how much they actually do know. And they might discover, those people that aren't in my discipline, they know more about this than I do. And then the other one that I love is they can discover the lens at which the discipline across, how does marketing look at this? How does production look at this? So kind of talk about that peer learning and discovery learning a little bit, because you alluded to discovery learning a little earlier in our conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you're putting teams together where they have different disciplines within the organization, you're doing yourself a great favor, because then they do see the perspective of their colleagues in different areas. And if I'm in marketing and someone across the table from me is in production and someone else is in finance, I am really seeing things from their perspectives, and their debate and their reasoning comes out in that great communication. I'm also learning, I'm networking with them. And so when an issue comes up that I think they should know about, they should help me solve, they should reach across borders or boundaries within the organization, I've got that person to call, because I've spent quite a bit of time on a team and gotten to know them very well. And in that way, it helps break down silos within an organization. It helps me see that big picture that I know, I may be looking at things through a vacuum in my own role, but I can reach out to people in other disciplines, even if they weren't at the table with me, and have them help me see things from a different perspective, because I had so much of that kind of aha in that experience. So that's where I think the magic is within these simulations and within these learnings, because you're not stopping at just one person and how their knowledge increased. You are, the rising tide, right, raises all ships. I always get cliches wrong, so you probably have to correct me on that one.
Well, you got that one right. And I guess that goes back to that whole collaboration, leadership and communication piece that the LinkedIn survey pointed out, that this creates, what I like to say, it creates that environment. We don't in either the supply chain or the partner stock or in any of the finance simulations or some of those, we don't specifically stand up there and say this is how you should communicate with someone else. That's for a different workshop. But what we do is create this environment where in a safe place they can do that and find out it's not as bad as I thought. They can do that and found out that oftentimes that person in that other department that I malign when they're not around, they really do care about the business. They really do care about getting it right. And they really do have some different challenges than I do in my department. And it's just amazing. And I always like to ask, at any time I run one of these, is what did you learn about someone else and their department? So it has nothing to do with the finance or the supply chain or the agile processing. And invariably, that can open up this really rich conversation that is so beneficial to the organization, because we just don't take the time to have those conversations normally. And oftentimes that opens up all kinds of things about the culture of the organization and what we're really here to try to accomplish, and all those sorts of things, which I believe is just phenomenal. So yeah, the peer learning and the discovery learning, and I probably could add to this of just that learning what? Well, not just the topic we're there to teach, but these other things that are so, so important.
Absolutely. You know, one of the things about business finance is we always thought, boy, that was the finance guy's job. No, as Jay says, finance reports the news. We're the ones that are impacting the news, right? With the decisions that we make every day. So then the accountability and the ownership begins to shift.
Yeah.
And we're pretty proud when those numbers, that score card of business comes up. And me as an employee of this organization or as a partner of this organization sees the health, the financial health of that organization rise.
You know, I was running Apples and Oranges years ago now, and I said, what initiatives are you trying to drive so I can, if I can, I'll support them. And they said, well, we're really trying to shift over to a lean processing, and it was a manufacturing organization. And I said, and how's it going? So we're getting huge pushback. Nobody wants to do it. They think they're, the more lean we get, they're going to lose jobs, blah, 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 blah. So I developed a little lesson just around what lean was and kind of what it was, just in the off chance I would have to do it. But then what I did was I called Jay, and I said, Jay, I've got this, and is there something I can tweak inside? Oh, he says, yeah. So he gave me a little thing to do inside Apples and Oranges. He says, that'll show that, when you jam it all up, you don't make as much money, and if you if you smooth your process out. So and Jay very wisely said, just don't ever use the word lean if that's what they're doing. I said, okay. So I went ahead and did it, and I had the manager of the weld shop, and he had come up in the company right out of high school. He'd been a welder his whole life, and then he moved into supervision. He was manager of all the welders in the weld shop, and as I was told, pretty valuable employee. He raised his hand, and he said, so would the fix to this problem be that lean stuff they're trying to get us to do? And I was like, yes! I said, that's exactly what they're talking about. He goes, oh, I get it now.
Yeah.
And you know what? I don't know to this day if he can tell me the difference between a P&L and a balance sheet, and it kind of doesn't matter. Right. That was something that Apples and Oranges was never intended to teach, but we were able to tweak it to teach it because that's what the client needed, and that helped get them, at least him, over the hump. And that was a huge breakthrough just in my own discovery for it. Well, if there's pros, there's always what, Libby?
There's always cons.
There's always cons, right? So let's talk about that a little bit. What are some of the cons on the gamification side? Sometimes it can lack strategic direction. And you mentioned this earlier, which was interesting. You said, we can't just play the game for the game's sake. It's not just there. Monopoly is there just to have fun with your family around the coffee table and eat popcorn and laugh and joke. And that is a great objective. But in the business world, when we're doing this, we're trying to get something else accomplished there. So we can put that into it, but then there's got to be a strategic direction. What ultimately are we doing with this game that actually gives us some new skill or knowledge or both or whatever insight? I've seen it overused, and this one drives me a little bit batty. I've seen people do games just for game's sake. They see something online, they go, oh, that's great, I'm going to do it, and both they don't have the strategic direction, and then they overuse it. It's like, well, I always say, why are you doing that? What are you hoping to get out of it? It can provide some unhealthy competition. I've seen arguments break out. I've seen people get angry with each other. That's why we as facilitators have to manage this really, really tightly. So there can be some unhealthy competition if it's not managed correctly. And then the focus can oftentimes be on the winning and not on the learning, which we've kind of alluded to just a little bit. So does that mean that you shouldn't do games or gamification? No, it doesn't mean it at all. It just means that we need to make sure when we build this out and we deliver it that we address these 4 items for sure, and maybe a few others, but that we address these and make sure that these don't become a problem for us. What's the con of simulations? Well, a lot of times I've seen people use a simulation. It doesn't connect back to their work at all. So I wonder, why are you doing it? Why would I do that? If there's no connection to the work, then it could be the best simulation in the world, but it doesn't do me any good. Or the connection back to the work is such a nebulous, and we have to explain it for 6 hours to get you to understand it. I think we've probably wasted our time there. This is another one that maybe it's my background as a pilot and a military person. there needs to be just the right amount of stress in the simulation. Libby, you're shaking your head up and down, right? So talk about that one a little bit, because that one always worries me some.
Yeah, absolutely. As the facilitator, Ned, and as the consultant, when you go into an organization and you are providing a simulation, you have talked at length typically with your buyer about what they need to get out of it. You also have talked about who's in the simulation, what roles they have. And there's certain situations where you don't want quite as much stress because it is a bit of a stress goal for some people. There are other situations that you want to put a lot of good stress on because people are hungry for the learning, right? And so if I'm hungry for the learning, I need a little stress. I need a little accomplishment at the end of the day. And I'm also going to be much more engaged. And so really that calibration is built into the simulation, but it's also very much dependent upon who's running, when you're running the simulation, knowing what the needs of the people are.
Yeah, I had a young lady come to me. I was running apples and oranges, and again, that's a one-day finance business simulation. There's not a lot of group decision making that takes place. It's fairly well scripted because we're teaching a very specific items, and she came walking in and she said, "Can I talk to you a minute?" And I said, "Sure." And didn't you want to go to the corner of the room? And I'm like, "What's going on?" So she said, "I'm really worried about something." And I said, "What are you worried about?" And she said, "Well, I just got my MBA and they didn't do a lot of finance, and so I'm going to look stupid in here because I took accounting 101 as an undergrad." And I go, "What'd you get your MBA?" And she said, "Marketing." And I go, "Well, okay, marketing probably didn't do a lot of finance in it. That's a marketing MBA, not a finance MBA." And she was just terrified. And so I was glad that in that particular simulation, there's not a ton of stress in it. There's just enough to make it right. It's kind of built in just perfectly. And I just told her, I said, "Look," I said, I'll tell you a secret. I said, "I'm going to issue you a thing called a pencil with an eraser. Just use it. It's cool." And she looked at me and I said, "Really?" And I said, "It's perfectly okay." And I said, "I'll guarantee you, with the exception of the CFO that's in the class, probably the other 30 people are feeling pretty much like you're feeling right now." Well, she ended up she had almost more input than anybody in the room. She knew more about it than she thought she did. She told me later, she goes, this wasn't scary at all. And I think that was important, that in her case, the stress wasn't going to be there, but it was there in her mind. In other cases, you're right. We need to kind of pull the stress up in the simulation, because if we don't, we're not going to challenge them enough. And if we don't challenge them and create some of those failures, the learning isn't going to be as rich, right?
Right, absolutely.
Okay, so games and simulations and training. So let's talk about that just a little bit. Everybody probably, if you're over the age of, I don't know, something, you probably remember going to your local watering hole and there was a little cocktail table and you could sit down and shove your quarters in there and do Pac-Man. And you know, a friend of mine has actually downloaded the Wooga 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 as his cell phone, his cell phone ring, which cracks me up, you know. And so we all kind of remember that little game there. And you know, failure was pretty rude here. You just died and you shove more quarters in, right? So that's kind of where this whole digital gamification, I think, started, somewhere in that vicinity. Then this technology came along, and we started playing games on our phones, and even in some non-gaming things, there's gaming put into it, and that's there. This is a tabletop. In fact, this is Apples and Oranges, a tabletop business simulation. So we've graduated, and that's now 30 some years old with Selemi. We've graduated all the way up to that, and which is now digital, and you can do it online. And then we're all familiar with the gaming piece of any kind of a card game, but there's many kind of cards that are used in business simulation as well. They don't maybe look like a card deck of playing cards, but they certainly accomplish the same thing. You get it, you have different information, you do different things with it. So those are all some of the kind of the gaming things that are put into this. In game theory, and believe me, this could be 400 hours of its own training just trying to understand game theory. But basically, the very blunt piece of it is, I make a choice, and it has some impact on a further choice and or another participant. That's the very basics of the game theory. Is I make a choice, I do this, that has an impact on a choice I make down the road and or an impact on other participants, either on my team or elsewhere. So can they be blended? Are they two separate things? Are they at war with each other? And I say no, they're not at war with each other. And yes, by all means, they can be blended. And we've kind of alluded to that a little bit. And we're going to give you a quick little example of kind of how we blend it with Selemi. So this is 2 cards out of a fairly large card deck for one of the ways that we can kind of tweak apples and oranges. So Libby, kind of talk about both the simulation piece and the game piece here, if you would, on how this runs.
Yeah, absolutely, Ned. You know, at Selemi, we call it serious fun because we're taking serious business content, we're gamifying it, we put it into a simulation, and we make it fun so that people come out of the training having really enjoyed themselves, having, it stick with them as they go out into the real world. And this part of blending the gaming with the simulation is part of all the magic involved. Here we're looking at an optional year 3 of apples and oranges, and we're looking at cards, and these cards are potential clients. And so we provide the teams with a number of clients that they can choose from, and then they're looking at different metrics from the clients. What's their volume then? How loyal are they? What's their image value? Are they price sensitive? Do they have payment terms that are favorable to us? And all of those things, as you're looking at a client, will affect the financial health of your organization depending on how your client mix is with those different metrics. And in this part of the simulation, you're really looking at, one of the big learning parts for me when I did this simulation several years ago was that a lot of times I would go after great image value clients, but they'd pay me in 180 days.
Yes, they do.
Yeah, they'd squeeze me on my margins, and I'm thinking, I've got all these big name clients and they're awesome, but wait a minute, really what is best for my organization? And so we're competing in this year for the team that creates the best synergies between the client mix and how that affects the financials of the organization. And it's the algorithms behind it, how they've created the weighting of those different metrics and then blended them back up into the financial documents within the simulation are pretty genius. It's really amazing. Yeah, and you really learn. If I'm sitting in production, if I'm sitting in procurement, if I'm sitting, wherever I'm sitting within the organization, I can have an impact on what client mix that we have. I don't have to be in sales, but I have an impact on those different metrics.
Well, and the other thing that I love about this is there's so many different topics that we can bring up. You alluded to one of them. We have an employees or a group of employees says, gee, why don't you sell this to this big name, huge, massive company over here? And it's hard for them to understand if they've never dealt with it, what it means to wait 120 days for your payment. It's like, well, we're getting it. What's the big deal, right? Well, they've already, in the first 2 years of operations, they've already learned a little bit about cash flow, and they go, oh, I get that cash flow thing. Then they get here and they go, oh, they're paying a lot longer than this guy. Maybe we want to get the money a little earlier. And they to your point, they understand that sometimes image value isn't all it's cracked up to be. They also learn things about and some of the best discussions about volume and then some of these, and we don't have an example here, but some of the other cards that come up, they have to take that over all 3 periods. It's a contract over a time period. These they can do just one and done, but others that they're going to do it this period, then next period, then next period, and then they've only got so much capacity. Well, there's where that business acumen of blending that with my production comes in. Can I even support Oh, what if another good deal comes along down the road and I'm stuck with this one? Yep, guess what? That's called business decision making. You're right. You might have to say sorry to another greater deal down the road. That's that risk reward kind of piece that goes into it. And they understand that this becomes a much wider conversation than just deliver the product. And it opens up these great conversations that I absolutely love. And you're right, the magic and the science and the algorithms behind all this, I don't even want to see it. It gives me a headache. But I'm glad that the team over there is so great to do it. Well, we've as they said on Car Talk, you've wasted another hour of your time. That's how those guys used to close out their show. I always got a big kick out of that. But anyway, we are up to the hour, and we want to stay right on it. I want to thank everybody for tuning in and being here live. And then if you're listening to this off the recording, it's great to have you do that. If you have a question for myself, here's my contact information in our website. If you have a question for Libby, please by all means reach out to her. And if you want to open up this conversation with us, we're glad to have it. Libby, I can't thank you enough for spending an hour of your day, which you probably could have been doing something way more successul and profitable than this. But we're both in this passion for sharing our information, and so I hope that you have some additional information and additional knowledge. And Libby, thanks for being here so much. Any closing thoughts that you want to share?
Well, just thank you so much for having me, Ned. And I really enjoyed everything that we talked about, and I hope everyone else did too.
Great. Thank you, everyone. We appreciate it very much. And again, if you need anything, just reach out and ask. We'll be glad to share it with you. Good day.